In this video, we're going to be continuing our studies of CSS. And frankly, throughout this whole course, we're still going to be using CSS. We're never going to get away from it. But what we're going to focus on here is what are unit sizes? If you don't know what those are, it's fine. That's why you're here, right? And then we're going to look at layout properties. And then we're going to touch on the box model. And then after that, what we're going to do is make a website. And if after I do these recordings, I decide to make some more and add them on at the end, you may have more than one website. But let's go ahead and get started talking about unit sizes and why do they matter and why should you consider them when making your next site. Unit sizes are important because when we put stuff on our page, we could tell it how big we want or need it to be. And as you go on in your careers, there may be only a small handful that you ever truly come across. But let's go ahead and check out briefly this website right here. Now, as you see it transition over, this is from the MDN docs. That's kind of hard to say fast. And it's just developer.mozilla.org. And then you could search for CSS values and units. Now, one thing I'm always going to say is that even though you have tutorials, you have blog posts and other things, never hesitate to go to official documentation. And yes, there is. I can look up the official documentation for HTML. And so even as you go on further in your careers and work with more advanced stuff, more technologies that other people have used to make everyone else's lives easier, never hesitate to go to the documentation and understand how to use it. Now, not all documentation is good. Some of the stuff that you'll find even on here is kind of dense or isn't as specific or is example friendly as you want it to be. But never hesitate, like I said, to come to where, all the stuff about CSS is officially and read through it. So as we come back now, we could see on the screen that we have two different kinds of unit sizes that we could group out. The first is absolute length units. We could think of these as units of measurement like centimeters, millimeters, inches, picas, which I've heard that before. It just sounds funny to say, points, and pixel. So far, we've used the pixels more than anything else. No matter how big, small, on a phone, whatever, a pixel or a pica or a centimeter is still of the same measurement size, right? It's absolute. Now, the other one, and this is kind of foreshadowing some other classwork that you'll have later on in this semester, is relative length units. And these ones that pop up on the screen right now are ones that you will see more often. Typically of the absolute length, I just really see pixel. But the relative ones, it's kind of what works for you. And so we have EM, which is relative to the font size of the element. So 2EM means 2 times the size of the current font. We have EX, which is relative to the X height of the current font. I don't see this one as much, but if you use it, cool. We have CH, which is relative to the width of 0. We have REM, which is relative to the font size of the root element. We have VW, which is relative to 1% of the view width. We have VH, which is relative to 1% of the view height. We have VMin and VMax, and those are relative to 1% of the viewports on a smaller dimension for the min and larger for the max. And then we also have percentage, which is also incredibly used a lot, is relative to the parent element. And I think you probably already see me do percentages on here. So the ones that I see the most that are used are PX, EM, REM, VW, and VH. That doesn't mean you should only use these. Remember, you have a bunch of tools and you should use them wisely for whatever your use case may be. But rather than me just talk about some of the stuff, let's go ahead and get coding and let's do an example showing you how some of these unit sizes work. So now that we've discussed the different unit sizes, what we're going to do is see how some of them work in code and, obviously in practice, right? They go hand in hand. So we have our live server working down here. And if you don't want to use a live server, you could actually just double click your index file and it should load in whatever your default browser is. I may or may not have mentioned that already, but yeah, this live server is a lifesaver. And there's nothing on the page right now other than the title changing for unit sizes. I just have a index and then style.css file. So there's no special anything else getting pulled in. So I'm going to minimize that. And what I'm going to do now is go and write out the code for what we're going to do. We have this stuff right here now. I haven't added the IDs in yet, but we have this, and there's this word. Hopefully I didn't spell it wrong. That'd be kind of embarrassing. Well, if I spelled a few things wrong, my eyes are just correcting it. We have responsiveness right here. And I'm trying to slowly take some of the themes we've already worked on, give you a preview of where we're going next down the road. But this is about responsiveness. And this is especially with these values here, the EM, REM, view width, and view height, you're going to see that things don't have to be static in nature. So let's go ahead and I'm going to pull this over so this just looks a bit more streamlined. And I'm going to come in and add the IDs, and then we're going to add in the styles and kind of see how everything changes. All right, so now I have the IDs here because they're all unique, right? They wouldn't be sharing a class because then only one style would be applied at a time. So we have these -px, -em, rem, the stuff that the ID kind of matches, with what's going on, what I'm going to do to that particular paragraph here. And one thing I want to bring up is you have a file like this and it's size -px. And this is a one file example. There's going to be one style, no CSS, right? But keep in mind how you name things, right? So this is unit sizes. So I took size -px. If this page linked to another one and I was talking about, I don't know, let's just say it was a news article. And that was, I don't know why I say this is linking to another page. My CSS naming strategy may be like article hyphen or news hyphen. And that way, when you start having more than one CSS file, or maybe you just have, one big CSS file, like I said, there's technology that does a lot of things. You won't have naming collisions, and you'll know that based upon what your page is doing and the main concept of it is, you could better name your styles more specifically. So that way some style on another page isn't overriding this one. And then you spend 3 hours wondering, what the hell is going on. So just as a little strategy there, but I'm going to, hopefully y'all have copied this down. I'm going to move this on over. And to help out a little bit more, because I realize there's only so much space, I'm going to come in here and just hit enter to separate all these out. Okay, the hot reload's going to save me there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the pixel one. So there's this one unaltered right here. I'm not going to touch it, but let's go ahead and do size pixel. And this should be no surprise what happens. And we see that this is much larger. This is, or should be, 32 pixels. Let's use our developer tools. We're going to click this and we see that it is 32 pixels. So our change has been made. And we can see right here in the developer tools that it is in fact 32 pixels. We could click this, turn it off. But interestingly, we'll talk about this in a moment. It knows to go back to something, right? So this should trigger in your mind that there's a default, right? But we're going to turn this back on, close out of these developer tools. We've made things different pixel sizes before. Nothing real new here. So now that we have this, we have 2EM, and it says EM is relative to the font size of the element. So what's the font size, right? This knows to be a certain size. This does, we told this specifically 32 pixels, but you also notice right here that the EM is the same exact size as the pixels. This is 32. We could assume that, unless our eyes are failing us, this is 32 as well. So let's come in here and let's actually check this out. Bring this on over. And this is 32 pixels. So it's not going to say, well, it's going to say 2EM right here. But when we click on the screen, this is another trick we have. We could see, if it's REM, whatever, but here it's going to tell us the actual pixel conversion right here. And this is 32. This is 32. So this is relative to the font size of the element. Well, what was the original element? 16. So we say 2EM right here. We're just saying double the default, essentially. So let's go on to the next one and look at that example. And so we're looking at this, and if we hover over, we see that this is 48 right here. So that's pretty cool. Let me go ahead and get out a calculator. So if this is relative to the font size of the root element, right? And I did, what was it? 3 REM. And this is coming out to 48. Let's do 48. That still comes out to 16 right here. So this is relative to the font size in and of itself, but then up here we have REM, which is the font size of the root element. And so I'm not going to go too further into, how are we getting the same things here, but this seems to be kind of self-reflecting as this kind of looks at a distance, another value, which these happen to be the same defaults. But you can play with some of the root element values and sizes, the defaults that get loaded in, and you can make this a bit more responsive to those values. So once again, not a deep dive, but just showing you how to maybe think through some of these. This is a very, very soft way of going through it. So here we have view width, which is VW. It says relative to 1% of the view width. Let's pop this open because I like using the developer tools. And ooh, did you notice that? Interesting. Well, that's fascinating, right? So this is what I mean by responsiveness. As I get wider, 1%, and this is actually 5%. Whenever you see, a 5 or whatever here, this is, we can think of 5% of the view width. So this could get big quickly with small numbers. So this looks tiny, right? This is the view width, but as we expand it, we quickly see that it gets pretty huge. Let's go ahead and open up the tools. It's going to shrink it up a little bit for us. As we see, this is 77.2 pixels. We'll bring it in here. And this is 20.9. This is saying, I'm going to take up about my size, my font size, about 5% of whatever the width is. So let's come down here and look at the next one. And we see right here, this is already a lot bigger. but we're kind of going sideways. We're kind of, changing the width more than the height. Well, one thing we could do with our developer tools is we come up here and we can change what we may be using. So let's do an iPad. So let's keep focus on this right here. This is VH, and let's change it sideways. We notice it's big here because it's got a lot of height. We flip it sideways, not as much. Flip it again. All right, so let's go ahead and look at iPhone X. It's pretty big, right? Flip it sideways. It gets a lot smaller. So even on iPhone X right here, this is 18.75 pixels. And then down here, we have 40.6. So as you make your websites, your tiny projects, your throwaway, whatever it is you're doing, keep in mind that we have control now. Now there's other things coming in the future to, make things stop happening at a certain size, or you could, make things certain sizes at certain screen widths, and that's a little bit more CSS we're going to learn down the road. But these are some of the more basic common unit sizes you're going to see. There's a lot of stuff out there online to dive really deep into these, but I recommend in your next project or whatever it is you do for fun, try switching some of these up, seeing how they fit your design, and see if it makes more sense to have something responsive than something that is more defined, like a pixel size, right? And you may come to the conclusion that on certain phone sizes, you want something a bit more responsive, but other sizes, you're fine with a set pixel, right? So this is all for now, and I'll see you in the next section. Now we're going to shift our attention to layout properties, but first, let me go ahead and just transition this over here. This is called Lorem Ipsum. It's not a language you have to master. It's not, but I think every developer should know about it. And what it is just dummy text, as it says right here. And why is it useful? Well, if you have a section that you need to see what it looks like with text, we could go ahead and use, this is just one of the many sites. And there's also a lot of like parodies. I saw one when I started doing web development that was like gangster Lorem Ipsum, and it was pretty ridiculous. But you could go ahead and just generate 5 paragraphs. And now you have all of this right here. And of course, we have these like random ads right here or whatnot. But this is a way that you could get some kind of text without coming up with a lot of ideas on your own. So you could see how things lay out. And if I've already discussed this, I apologize. I don't do all these videos in one take in one day. So I may cover some topics twice, but still, it's nice to know these or this website. And so switching back, what we're going to talk about are layout properties for this section. Layout properties are essential. I think everything that we're covering with CSS is essential. But let's go ahead and discuss the display section first. So on screen here, I think it may not be the end all be all, but I'm going to show you everything that is a block and an inline element. And so that may not make a lot of sense right now, but as I explained through, it should make some sense. And also off of your coding and typing you've done so far, you could probably start to recall some of these things that I'm saying with what you've already seen. So let's first discuss the block elements here. So this means that all attributes, so we're talking about it's, width, height, anything you give it are recognized by the surrounding elements, meaning that if you make something bigger, it will shove away everything else around it. It's not going to necessarily bleed into a line above or a line below or to the left and to the right. And also, these are very selfish elements. because they do not share side-by-side space with anything else. So when you put a block element onto your page, it's gonna, take up that entire line that it's given to it. And whenever you manipulate it, try not to say that 10 times fast, it will say, get out of my way to the things that are surrounding it if it needs to. The next is an inline element. Now you can't alter the width and the height and maybe some other attributes about it. But one thing that they're really good at is coexisting with surrounding elements. So even if you have a block element, but on the inside you have some inlines, that's a cool arrangement. The inline will be like, all right, I'm not trying to here to startle anybody or anything, but maybe you have a piece of text in a paragraph or something, and then you need to wrap a word or a few words inside of an inline element because you need to make it bold or make the font bigger. The inline shares its space just fine as long as it's inside a block element. Now, the third category we have is an inline block. And so this is one that you could alter the attributes such as the width and the height, much like you can with the block level. And it can coexist with the surrounding elements like it can in an inline. But one of the things that's powerful about it is it will tell the surrounding elements, get out of my way. I'm getting bigger. I'm changing left, right, up, down, sideways, whatever. Whereas the inline, you could alter and change some things, but it more so, I would say, either, I don't want to say writes over, but it's way more constrained by its surroundings. So you kind of have the best of both worlds with an inline block. That doesn't mean you should only use a block or an inline block, because sometimes you just don't need to make that extra change. But keep in mind these three things is sometimes your elements, your images, how stuff is arranged isn't flowing well. You may want to come back here and ask yourself, is it taking up all the space possible? Or maybe if stuff is getting grouped together more left to right than, a brand new line, maybe they're all inline and I need to change them to block level elements. So that's something that we should refer back to, and you should refer back to as well. And sometimes I even forget, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's differences between these things. Because sometimes you just visually know how things appear on the page, and then you get a specific scenario where you're like, oh yeah, this is inline, it needs to change to a block. The next thing we're going to look at are floats or a float. And all a float does is a CSS attribute is it moves the element to the left or the right in the container. And so this allows text and inline elements to wrap around it. So our values for this are none, so it's just doing what it's doing. Or you can move it to the left or to the right side of the screen. And since we're not showing an example right now, although we're going to code these up, you could think of maybe a children's picture book where you have images and the text just kind of glides around the image. It just kind of flows around, or even a newspaper. This is kind of dark, but an obituary, right? You'll have the top two paragraphs, and then you may have the picture, some text to the side, and then the text continues to take up all the space going down. And so just look around at, any kind of literature that may have pictures nearby. And if you see the text coinciding on the same line as a picture, we could think of that image itself having some kind of float value. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is one I have to reference a lot because I just have not committed it to memory. But like I said at the beginning of this video, I don't memorize a lot. And that is position. There are a few different positions, and some have way more use cases than others. And it all really depends on what you're trying to do and solve. And this may be just a lot of words, but it's nice to know these exist because just like the display, you may have to think about your positions and maybe the position of a parent element in order to pull off the style or effect you want to. And so first we have a static position, and this is the default. When something lands on your page, when you type it and put it in there, that's static. That's just how the default, right? Everything needs a default. The next one is relative. And so a relative position it just translates to its position relative to its normal position. And so this means adjusting the top, right, bottom, and left properties will move it away. So it'll be close-ish to static when you put it on the page. But since it's relative to where you put it, if you were to say, hey, move over 5 pixels, move to the top 10 pixels, it'll be like, okay, and then it'll go and do that. So relative, we could think of as relative to the starting point where it normally would be, but it like pops out of the normal flow. The next we have is fixed. And this is positioned to the viewport. This means it will always stay in the same place when the page is scrolled. So maybe we've been to a website where it looks like we have a sidebar where there's maybe menus or it's a tutorial or something. And, like maybe the right side of the screen scrolls forever, but the left side seems to stay in one place. A reason for that could be is that the left side of that page is fixed. Or we could also think about a menu. Maybe you've been to a website where you're just scrolling, but the menu just stays right at the top. We could think of that as a fixed position. Although there's, multiple ways to do this stuff. The same stuff with CSS. The next is absolute. And this is positioned to the nearest ancestor. And so I will show you, obviously, in code what this looks like, but it's kind of hard for me to explain right now. For me, it's one of those visuals that I'll just have to show you. The next is sticky. And this position translates to a position based on the user's scroll position. So it's not quite fixed, but it's a bit more, I would say, has more like staying power on a page. It once again, we're going to do an example because absolute and sticky, I think, are the ones that will need a bit more visuals. So enough talking on my end. Let's go ahead and actually code these up. So what we're going to look at now is the effect that we could use, or float really. How do we use it? And how is it going to change fundamentally what we see here? So I already typed this out once, and I think it was the live server. Something wasn't updating, and I copied and pasted in my correct code off of another screen, and it was identical, but somehow it triggered something, and everything started working fine. So just to save time on my end, we have this head, and then the child element is an H1 here. Now, there's a head. There's also a foot or footer. And so this just designates to the web page that, hey, this is going to be at the top. This has special meaning to it. And you may see something else on here new, which is section. And some of these things will give you semantic meaning to a page, which means, it gives you extra special meaning in the browser, but also if there's reading devices, it's a nice way to organize, clean up, your code. And as you get further into your careers, there's going to be lots of technologies that, make styling and all this other stuff way easier. And you will see a lot of divs. Divs could be abused very easily. Divs could be whatever you want them to be. But right here, what you see I'm doing is I have a div, and it has a class column and left -col for left column. And then I have another div around this other section in here, column, middle column. And then we have this other one down here, respectively. So I'm using this div to chop up, or these divs to chop up the page into 3 sections, main sections. And then I have the head up here. And so also a class, you could have more than one class applied to any kind of element on the page. All you have to do is just put a space in between them. So now let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to impact the column class, which is all three of these divs right here. And I'm going to say float left. And what you see is they move out of place from where they normally would be. And they say, all right, we're all going to go to the left where there's space. So not much happens with this unordered list right here, the home, about us, order Chinese food. But we could see that below it, the other two column classes, or divs, I should say, notice, hey, there's some space here. And also to the right of this, there's some space as well. So they all move left together. And if, imagine this head element here had a float to it as well, it would probably all try and wrap all the way up here as well. But let's come down here and add another styling in. Just, it's not huge. I just want to do it. So we're removing this. So this looks maybe more like a navigation. Let's come down here. So now we have a border around all these. And this is to show you how things line up, because even as we're using the float up here, we sometimes don't know how much space something truly is taking up. So a border is always a very, 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 very good tool. And you could use it too. It's not just for, almost logging visually to the screen what's going on, but you could do cool stylistic things with the border too. And so we all know how much space these things are taking up here. So let's come in then and do something like this. Give everything 33% width. And as we spread this on out now, you can see everything is divided in 2/3 across the page here. And so we have all this space here, here, and here divided up amongst these three columns. And this is all able to be done using float left. Now, what if we did float right? You see that middle stays where it needs to, because, it's still doing what where the instructions were given it. But now this was on the left side, and it's like, no. On the line that I was on, I'm going to move to the right. And then the middle column says, oh, there's space to the left of this. And then the right column says, oh, there's space to the left of the middle column. And so just because you do something right, you switch something from left to right. If you have one item that you're worrying about, it may just move from here to here. But if you have a multitude of items, you will fundamentally change the side of the screen they all align on. Now, to let you know in the future, if you find this annoying when you do it for your own websites, there are other options available out there we'll get to when we get to full responsiveness. But it's very, very handy to know what floats are, because sometimes you just need to, adjust a left or a right float to something when you are, working on a project, and then off you go. And you don't really have to reinvent the wheel too much because it's good enough. So this is how you work with floats on a very, very, very small scale. And in the next section, we're going to be working more with the positions, showing how those work. So see y'all in just a moment. Now we're going to be looking at positions. It's those things where I was able to explain kind of verbally how some of them work, but then in other cases, we just have to see, or at least I like showing them rather than talking about in the abstract. So let's go ahead and get our page set up, and then we'll go and walk through what do they look like and how do they work. And earlier I discussed using Lorem Ipsum. Now I have some saved off to the side, and I'm going to copy it all and bring it over because I feel that would just be easier than repeating the process in front of everyone. So as you can see here, I have a lot of text going on, example div. I have a lot of things here, but I didn't want to have a million layers of text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow things up so we have to scroll. So now we have to scroll a little bit. Actually, let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. All right, now we have to scroll more. Awesome. So let's come down here and do some fun stuff with the div. And just before we continue, where did I leave the div at? Example div. So this right here is what we're going to play with. So we are going to have our font size here, 25 pixels. Let's do a border again, 2 pixel, solid black. And now let's go through the position. So let's first think about which ones we want to do, what we want to start off with. And let's do position absolute. So you notice here that, and let me move this over because this doesn't matter as much now. So let's go start off with static, which is just where it was originally, right? There's no qualms, no arguments there. But let's go down to the absolute. And you see it now is like hanging on the next line of Lorem Ipsum right there. And that is because absolute is position to the nearest positioned ancestor, or it just kind of looks for the next, ancestor and just kind of like doggy piles on top of there. Now, this is a very simple example. As you have more complex structures, it will still be the fact that it works like this, but there may be sometimes you choose a position and you have to tilt your head to the side and you have to kind of see what are the parent child sibling divs. So this is how the absolute works. As we scroll, still hangs out right here. So let's go ahead and do our next one here. So let's do relative, which is relative to where it was. So it looks kind of the same as static, right? But let's do something like, I don't know, let's do top 40 pixels. And now you see that it moves. What if we wanted to do 70? And we see that we could move it around here. Let's see if this works. And we see that we're still moving it because it pops it out of place. You see it's like reserved where it was, like this space here. But now we could kind of lift it out and then move it around on our page as we need to. Now, one thing that you use relative, and I believe absolute, this is off the top of my head, is for those pictures where you have like you're greeted with a web page and then you have text that is laying on top of the picture. Using relative is a way to achieve some of those layering techniques that look really cool. So that may be a reason why you want to pop something out of place. Alrighty. So the next one we're going to go to is we're going to look at fixed. All right. And so fixed says position to viewport means it will always stay in the same place when the page is scrolled. And we can see that it does, in fact, stay there. The space, the preservation originally just kind of fades out, as you can see. But if you have an idea where you want something to always stay in the exact same spot, you could use fixed. Another one that we're going to look at is, let's see here, is sticky. And sticky is its position based upon the user's scroll position here. So as we do this, nothing's going on here. But let's come in here and add interesting. So it hangs out right there. But then as we do this from the top, we could force it to come down with us as we get through part of the page. So right here, nothing's happening. And then we just move it on down with us right here. Now I use, or I see sticky get used sometimes for headers and also for footers if you want to adhere something to the top or the bottom of your page. Once again, it depends on what your goal or your goals are, but sticky is one of those interesting use cases where it looks okay, but then when you have a specific use case, you're like, wow, this is, kind of saving my butt right here. So these are the different positions that you could use. You don't have to memorize them or master them. Just know that they're out there. And when you see one come up, or if you're using the Chrome developer tools, be sure to play around and maybe change the position on them and see how it affects the layout of the page. And if you don't like it, just hit refresh. But anyways, that's it for now. And I think in the next section, what we're going to do is look at the box model and start to kind of fuse some of the larger ideas lurking in the background together. And then after that, a little project to kind of show how a lot of the stuff works. So now we're going to discuss the box model. What is the box model? It is something that applies to a box or something that is a block. We were talking about the displays earlier. So basically anything that will force any other element to a new line and says, this is my space, it will, take on the attributes of a box model. This also partially applies to something that is like an inline block, or some people say inline box as well. Complete inlines, those kinds of elements won't be as applicable in this situation here. But for those things, let's say just like a paragraph tag or something along those lines, or anything else that we will just change the display setting to a block, what does the box model mean? And so what I'm going to do here is use a picture from someone I follow on Twitter, and she is awesome. And there's this amazing picture. So we have the content. The content is actually her on the inside. This is kind of like the focus. It could be text. In this case, hilariously, it's a picture, but it could be whatever markup you want to put on your page that will draw the user's eyes to it. The next is the padding. As you can see above her head, there is space between the top of her head, like the crown, and the top of this box here. And so we could give padding to our block elements by giving padding to the left, the right, the bottom, or just all around. And I'll show you different ways of doing that as well. We also have this thing called the border. And we see that the border is clearly sitting on the outside of the padding. We can see the border. The border is red, but we don't really have any color to the padding. It's kind of transparent, at least for this picture's sake, for the example we have here. But we could still see where the content and the padding, how much space it takes up by having a border. A border is a really good way of kind of seeing where your elements are on the page, if they're taking up more space than necessary. They're what we're going to learn later. They're kind of like in JavaScript where you have like a console log statement to kind of see what the value is of anything at a certain time. And a border is the kind of the visual equivalent of that at a high level here. And so the last thing we have is a margin. And you can see margin is right above where that red border is. And all a margin does is the white space that is between the block level element and all the other elements. So we could see that maybe the only thing above this box is the ceiling. Now, may not be. There may be a chandelier. We do not know. But we could see it starts with the content, her on the inside, the padding, which, is not just from her top of her head to the top of the box, but from each shoulder out to the box as well. And we could also make the assumption that there'd be zero padding between, her sitting on the box and the actual box itself, right? She's not floating in the middle of it. And then we have the border that sits on top of the padding. And then the margin is just kind of the white space between that, her and everything else going on. So let's go and start coding and doing an example. And I hope this made you chuckle a bit. Go follow her online and let's go see an example. All right. So let's go ahead and look at the box model here. So we've looked at the, positioning, the, floating things, the inline elements, block elements, all that other stuff. The box model is equally important. And the two previous things may have been a bit more technical. This is less so, but I saved it for the end because in discussion with spacing, sizes, floating, whether something takes up a whole line or could share a line, another with an element to the left or to the right of it, that kind of starts us to ask questions of, what can I do with some of these elements? And we played with the border a little bit, and we're going to show that as well. But let me go ahead and get to talking and typing at the same time. And let's do this. This is the content portion of the box model. And so we're just going to come up here and select this one p tag right here. Let's give it a general font size of 30 pixels. Make it a little bit larger there. Background color. Give it that background color there. And I imagine this has probably already been copied, so I'm going to move this on over. You could always pause the video or just download my stuff from GitHub. So what I'm going to say right now is this impacts the content. So the content itself is part of the model, right? Because a box is kind of how is an element on your page layered. And initially with HTML, you may just see text or a picture, but there's much more to it that encases it. And so this is just impacting the content right here. But let's work next on the padding. Okay, so we're going to do this. Let me change this to actually to a darker color here. There we go. So now we see the padding is 25 pixels. Another thing I want to talk about when it comes to padding and or margin is trouble. And so whenever you want to change the padding on certain parts of an element, this will do it for everything. We could see that there's, a lot of spacing, a lot of padding everywhere. Granted, this text isn't aligned, so it looks like there's a lot here, but we can see top, bottom, and here, there's the 25 pixels. I could promise you it's being added to over here, but like I said, it just looks odd because this is a, block level element here. But what if I wanted to do something like I wanted to add 30 pixels on top. And then let's go to the right, 9 pixels. To the bottom, I want to add 60 pixels. And then to the left, let's do 4 pixels. And so you see at the top, there's this 30 pixels. To the right is 9 pixels. So once again, it doesn't look, the best solely because we already had all this space over here. But TRB for bottom, so there's 60 down here. So you notice this does almost, visually look double of what we had up above. And to the left, we have about, 4 tiny little pixels there. And that, like I said, that works in margin and padding as well. So let's just come back here and turn this back to 25. The next layer we have to look at is the border. We've used this before. And so we see that the border is sitting on top of the padding. Before it looked kind of cool with the padding. Maybe if I centered this text, it would look even better. But you notice how even this border right here makes it look a little bit more snazzy, right? And it exists just beyond on the other side of the padding itself. If I want to come down here and do something like a border radius, this is a little bit more of an advanced technique, but let's do something like that. And that looks kind of looks kind of funky there. But what I'm doing is I'm slowly, slightly, thinning out the edges right here. Now there are, much more clean ways of doing this than what I'm showing. This actually looks kind of interesting here. But there are ways to round out your corners on things. And I'm just showing you, you have border, but you have a lot of extra border control. The last thing I want to talk about is the margin. And so let's do margin. And so margin, what this does, it moves the element in a certain distance with respect to what's to the left, right, top, or bottom of it, although it should be top, right, bottom, left, because I just talked about trouble. But say I wanted to move this down, and this is the only thing on the page. So this is the only, we only have this right here. Let me tighten this up. So what I want to do is I want to move this away from, say the body here. This is the only other element. So what I could come in and do is specifically do margin top 20. Now let's come in here and do something more noticeable like 200. And we see that it moves down in relation to, since it's the only thing here, it's moving down from the body. If I wanted to come in and add a header or heading, we see it goes even farther down because it's moving 200 pixels away from this right here. So this is how you could use margin. There's margin right, left, bottom. You could just use margin in and of itself there. These are all things you're going to have to play with. Maybe something looks good at 25 pixels for the padding, but at 26, it just doesn't work. And so you are going to be using the box model forever. You just can't get around it. This is kind of the essence of what you put on a page. And I would recommend practicing this, making your own little examples, or if you have your own little project, going back in or making an extra copy and maybe playing around with the padding and the margins, and then also adding that in with the floats and then the display styles. And before you know it, you could make a pretty sweet looking website with just very, 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 very basic instructions coming in from the CSS. So in the next section, what we're going to do is I have a web page that I made, website, web page, the folder, and my other screen says web page. So we're going to see me build out a little bit more air quotes complex website, and we're going to talk about it as we go along. See you there. In this section here, I believe this will be most likely the final section of this video. We're going to build a more robust-ish looking website compared to what we typically have been doing with just the bare minimum HTML, the bare minimum CSS. This isn't going to be the most professional looking website ever, but it's going to show, it's going to be a little bit more robust. And, I'm not going to go and do an example like you may find on YouTube where someone gives you something extremely polished, because odds are your first, second, third attempt, it may look good, may get a little bit better, but I think it breaks expectations if I was to do an example and it just looked perfect, because I'm not a designer, and you need to understand that things like iteration need to happen. So what I'm going to do is make a site for Bernie's fan page, which is my dog. If at this point you still don't know what my dog looks like, here are the pictures we're going to use. Look at that fluffy butt right there. Look at he's always staring at me. His butt is either facing me or his face is staring at me because he's a clinger. And this is him standing up because he can walk like that for a little bit and is insanely impressive. He's got a stronger core than I do. So what we're going to do is come up here. Actually, let's go into the CSS first. Now I've already written this, so I kind of remember what order I did it in, but yeah, we'll just roll with this here. So I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to do a background color, and I'm going to copy over the color I have from my example on another screen. So we're adding that in, and it's not quite white. It's just kind of to make it not plain, I guess. So then I'm going to add a heading. Bernie's fan page right here. I'm going to come in and give this an ID. Page title. Okay. Let's come over here and we're going to do page title. And I also hope when you see this, you kind of see the flow of like section, style, section, style. When we get into the responsive stuff later, it's going to be more iterative. We're going to be coming back to sections to tidy things up. But since we're only assuming that we're really going to be working on a laptop or a desktop, we could be a little bit careless with smaller screens. Text align center. And then we're going to add some text shadow. We may or may not have done this already, but we're just going to do this 3 pixel, 3 pixel, actually 3 pixel, 3 pixel. And then we're going to add this for the actual color. So now that we have all this stuff, we could see that we have the assets, just a folder in these 2 files. So I'm going to collapse this on over just so we have more real estate to work with. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to do the div dot, well, not dot, image wrapper. And so we see it creates the div with the ID attached to it. And this was my issue. There we go. Awesome. So I was wondering, like, where did that text shadow go? Is it the live server that may be screwing things up sometimes? But no, typos exist too. So be prepared to make plenty of them. So we have this image wrapper right here. And what I'm going to do is do an image times 4. That looks actually kind of terrible. I hate how it formatted that. Then again, for all the work it did for me, it's whatever. And for the alt, we would want better, more suggestive things to describe for the image what is there. We could see that it's a bunch of broken images, Bernie, Bernie, Bernie. But we can correct it without, having it look broken by actually adding the source in. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to come into here. And let's just update all these. And you're going to see it looks absolutely terrible right now. And that's 100% okay. If you're following along, you're going to do this later. It's fine. So you can see that we have a lot of burning going on here. And they're all kind of stacked up. And as much as I love him, and you should probably too, I want that stuff to be a bit smaller. So what's something I could do to target all of these images, I could use a class. And we're going to call this Bernie-image. Because if it was just IMG, right, then that's kind of weird if I was to come over here. Like, how confusing would it be if I had image and then I had a class name image? And if you have, you know, a gigantic CSS file, you're gonna screw something up, right? So let's just come up here and do Bernie image. More robust, it stands out a bit more. And so what do we want to add in here? Let's do a width of 20%. So that lines up a lot better. But these are kind of off to the side, right? This is kind of meh. So what can I do? And this may not be entirely obvious, but we have a wrapper, not like, you know, like your favorite rapper, like Future or whoever. But we have this ID up here. So let's use it and let's see if we could just target that ID and just shift everything over, because we're not going to want to do these one at a time. We want to move the container, the thing that wraps all these. We want to move it slightly over. So let's see if we could do that. And yes, I know we could do it because I've already done it. So we're going to take the image wrapper and we're going to do text align center. And it moves it that way. And you may be thinking, this is text align, this is image. That's weird. It says, describes how inline contents of a block are horizontally aligned if the contents do not completely fill the line box. So it says text, but it's really talking about the, you know, what we discussed earlier, the difference between inline block and, you know, inline block level element. So always read and always remember that some things are named in an interesting fashion. So don't think text is always just going to be for text. So we have this stuff right here. We got Bernie. All right. We have this div. Let's come down here to the next section. Let me adjust on my other screen here. So up next, we're going to have this H2 with an ID. It says fan club heading. Reasons to join Bernie's fan club. I hope you do join. I hope you're smashing those likes, subscribes, all my students. This is a shameless plug because he's a little expensive. And so let's come on over here and let's look at the fan club heading. And you don't always have to do a one-to-one when you make something. Sometimes you want to see how stuff gets laid out on a page, and then you may develop more ideas. I've already coded this stuff out, so I'm just showing you from one element to the style how I did things. But some of this stuff I went back and styled later on just because I got different ideas as I adjusted stuff. So we have the fan club heading here. Font size, 35 pixels. Let's do some more text align center. Get used to doing that. And sweet, we got this down here. So now that we have that, what we want to do then is we want to have another section coming on in. And so this is going to be kind of interesting here. So I'm going to do a div. And there's going to be a class, and it's going to say reason wrapper. And you may be seeing kind of a theme. I had an image wrapper up here. Now I have a reason wrapper. A wrapper is a good idea to have around a section because, like, I was able to move all these images to the center. Logically sectioning off your website into pieces makes it easier to navigate read, style, and it's more predictable as you change your styles. And then later on, when you have things like JavaScript. So even if you have a wrapper and you have a class or an ID, you may not quite do anything with it in that moment. It's just nice to come back through and see, oh, there's a wrapper. I'm used to seeing that word. Here's another one, because it gives you an idea of where stuff is at, because I've seen HTML files that are hundreds of lines long. So small stuff like this helps out. So just throwing that out there. So now we're going to make another div here. We're going to have a join reasons. And you know what? Let's do this times 2, because we're going to have 2 sections in here. We're going to make an unordered list. And let's say for this first one right here, he is fluffy. All the latest up close pictures. He needs more friends. That is true. He does need a lot more friends. And so let's go ahead and copy this, because I kind of want 2 lists. And what I want to do is put them side by side. I'm going to show you one way you could do that. So I'm just going to change the text over here to, you can give him treats. Personalized silly cameos. And then funny Bernie sounds. He makes a lot of them. So I have this, and I have these 2 lists right here. Cool. And what I kind of want to do is line them up under here. And how am I going to do this? So I'm going to go down below the fan club heading. I'm going to target the reason wrapper. We're going to do another text align center. Okay, that stuff's over there. That's pretty cool. Then I'm going to come down. And then the next thing I want to do is do the join reasons, because these both here have the same class, this, as well as this, and I want to target those. I know this looks like complete crap right here with the dots, and this is moved over. Don't worry about that. We'll clean that up in a moment. We're going to do a display of an inline block. And let's just make the font size a little bit bigger. Make this 25 pixels. And now we see that originally the bullet points were all the way over here. We had the stuff on over. But now everything seems to be centered in here, which is pretty cool. So I still don't want these bullet points here, because I just 99% of the time you're going to remove them, or your graphic design team is going to have their own special icon things you stick here. So that's just the way things roll. So let's go ahead and come down below here and do an unordered list and do a list style, none. And now they're gone. All right, cool. That looks better. But I think the stuff there is a little jammed up. And plus, since I don't want to, I want more space, because sometimes you go to websites and there's a lot of stuff up here, and then maybe there's a footer that's sitting up really high, but we have the space, we have a desktop. So let's go ahead and fill it out more, and let's make a larger gap between each of these list items on either side. And so we could do that by going to our unordered list. And then we're targeting every line item. So we see this up here. So we see the UL and then the LI. So wherever there is a line item, that is a descendant of unordered list here. So basically anytime you have this, what we're going to do is we're going to come in and then we're just going to line height 50 pixels. And we see now that there's a decent amount of pixels between these. And so there's a nice gap in space between these as well. Maybe I don't want, all this text centered down here, but you know what? That is fine with me. I don't care for this initial go through that the text could be maybe turned up a little bit more. So now that we have that out of the way, we're actually almost done. So now we have this next section coming into here, and we have a div form wrapper. Move that on down. Awesome. So we have 3 wrappers. So 3 sections, 3 logical breaking points here. Let's go ahead and just make this form. And we have an action here. What we could do is just go ahead and delete it. This, when you have a form, traditionally there's a lot of stuff you could do with PHP. This is not a PHP course, nor are we touching upon it. And forms aren't only there to serve PHP. So think of when you sign up for something or you sign into something, right? There's a lot more options we have today. So I'm just going to extract that out. You don't need it for this example. So let's go ahead and make a label. This is going to be for our first name. And then we got to come in here and actually type first name. So we have this off to the side here. Don't worry. We're going to flush it out later. So come below here and we're going to do an input. And this is going to be text. And let's add some more stuff to it here. Now you don't have to do the styling I'm doing, but I really do not like scrolling left to right. So I would rather format it like this. Later on in your careers, there are things called like linters and stylers or whatever that will format this stuff for you. But since I don't have that fully set up, it doesn't make sense. Plus for your viewing purposes, you don't want me to scroll left and right. You'd rather read up and down with the space I have. Okay, cool. So now I have a label, and this label is for this ID. The value is Mark. It's already in here. So let's go ahead and make the rest of our form. And so let's go ahead and just copy this structure right here. Give me one moment here. It'll look off screen to just double check. Okay, so let's come down. So this is going to be for last name. That is not my my last name, but in an alternative universe, it is my last name. So we have Mark, last name Wampus. And let's go ahead and do something for, let's add in an email. So I can't even type, for email. And if you're wondering, when it comes to forms, just like tables, you're going to spend an unhealthy amount of your career creating these things. We're going to remove the value. Actually, let's keep it like that. And then what we're going to need after that is a button. And then we're going to use a submit. It's not going to do anything for now, but we have this. Cool. So we have a button that, Doesn't really do a whole lot. It submits, so it kind of refreshes the page there as you saw. So let's come in here and style this out now. So what I want to target next is the form wrapper. So let's text to line center. So we can see it's right there now. All right, that's cool. Font size, 34 pixels. Awesome. So now let's target the form itself. Let's give it a background color. And I'm going to copy this from the other screen I have right now. So now we have this. All right, so it looks cool. We have these pictures, and sometimes, you know, maybe you'll have some kind of background color up here, like this will be like some kind of dark gray. Then you have a white, and then you have like another color. It is very common to kind of like switch from a white background or whitish background to, you know, some other branded color. So I'm going to move this back on over so it's easier to see. And so let's go ahead and change the labels, or at least update those styles. And so let's do a background color, and we actually do transparent. So that way, if there's any kind of color or any other adjustments in there, it doesn't, sometimes you kind of have this like two-tone effect when you have a background color like impact the background color of its parent. So sometimes I just preemptively do stuff like this just so there's no accidental bleeding on over. So now we're going to target the email label. And we're going to do a padding left. And let's do 67 pixels. Now let's look at the, just to make sure I did this here for the email label. I did not add that in. Okay, so ID equals, and sometimes these things happen. There we go. So now we see that this ended up aligning-ish with the first name and last name up here. Before it was kind of off here a little bit, so now it looks more flush and aligned, which is nice. It's not the only way we could do it here, but with some of the things we've seen so far in the video, and hopefully if you've been attending class, this is one way we could get to this result. So let's come down here to input. Let's change the font size to 24 pixels. The height to 45 pixels. And then the width to 250 pixels. Once again, it doesn't look the prettiest, but you give your users a lot more space to come in here, click, and then the font is much larger. And the last thing we want to do is decorate the button. So let's go ahead and make the font size 25 pixels. Let's give it a border radius of 5%. And then finally, background color of, what ugly color did I choose? Aquamarine. And that's it. This has been about almost up to 30 minutes here. And yeah, this isn't an amazing, beautiful website, but most of your websites from the start aren't going to be great. And when you join a company, to be honest, you really aren't going to be doing much from scratch. You may just add one more image, or you may update just the form, right? It's very rare you'll be doing things purely from scratch because you're going to be just adding on and editing an existing code base. But never look at your beginning sites like they're trash. I mean, I think this is not that great. But what I already have logically, though, is the top. I have some sweet pictures here of my dog. I have a sign up section here I could decorate and work on. And I have forms. I could also add a footer down below for more contact information, like you see on most websites. But this is the genesis of any website. And if you don't believe me, go back and look at how Twitter looked when it first came out, or Facebook or Amazon. They all looked insanely terrible compared to what they look like now. And that is because of iteration and just making the product better over time. So hopefully you all have made this video, recreated it, or have made your own, inspired off of it, have your own dogs or pets up here. Like, share, subscribe. I appreciate everything. And for my students, I'll see you in class. And for everyone else, I hopefully see you in the comment section.